Chapter 19. Shadows Waiting. Lan led the way through the city, and Ran saw it was devoid of any animal life. Only weeds grew in here. There were tumbled walls and collapsed roofs, yet the city took his breath away. It could have swallowed Baerlon many times over, and each pale marble building had at least one dome. The walkways were lined by columns. Tom must have been laughing at them for thinking Baerlon was a city. Moraine found a building she deemed suitable, twice as big as the Stag and Lion, and had them bring the horses inside the stable. Lan settled Moraine in the main room, covering her in his cloak, and Nynaeve tended to her with Egwene as her assistant. Rand heard the wisdom tell Lan, "I may not like her, that's true, but I help anyone who needs my help, whether I like them or not." Lan replied, "I made no accusation, wisdom. I only said to have a care with your herbs." Tartly she replied, "The fact is she needs my herbs, and so do you. There's only so much she can do with her one power, and she's done as much as she can do with that without collapsing. Your sword cannot help her now, Lord of the Seven Towers, but my herbs can." Moraine told Lan to relax. The wisdom means no harm, she just doesn't understand. Frowning, Nynaeve asked what she doesn't know, and Moraine told her, "All I truly need is a little rest. I do agree with you, though. Your skills and knowledge will be more useful than I thought. I just need something that will help me sleep for an hour, but will not leave me groggy." Nynaeve started listing off options as Ran followed Tom into a makeshift stable. The dust was thick, not a trace of tracks until they'd entered. They started to unsaddle the horses, except for Matt, who just stood there looking grim and withdrawn. Rand asked if he's all right, and Matt told him he was thinking about the old tongue he'd used, and what Moraine had told them about it. He admitted, "It's as if a dead man was speaking with my mouth. I didn't like it." Matt scowled when Perrin chuckled and said, "Aemon's war cry, right? Maybe your Aemon come back again. You always go on about how dull Emond's Field is. I thought you'd like being a hero and king reborn." Tom chided Perrin, saying, "Don't say that. It's dangerous and stupid talk. The dead can be reborn, or take a living body, and it's not something to talk lightly of. The old blood, she said, not a dead man, and I've heard it can happen. It was your roots, boy, running all the way back to Manetherin and maybe beyond. Well, now you know your family is old. Let it go at that and be glad. Most folks don't know much beyond having a father." Rand felt bitter that he couldn't be sure that he even had that, and hoped the wisdom was right. Matt nodded at Tom's words, then asked if it could have anything to do with what happened, why they're chased. Tom told him to just focus on getting out of here safely for now, then headed into the main room. Ran reassured him, saying that they're all in it together. Matt gave himself a shake and proposed that while they're in a real city, with no annoying crowds, they should explore. Perrin worried about the Trollocs, but Matt reminded him that they won't enter, if Lan is right. Ran remarked that Aradol must have truly scared the Shadowspawn if they still won't enter. Not even Manetherin's reputation as the thorn in the Dark One's foot stopped them coming to Emond's Field. Perrin said they should check with Moraine before leaving, but Matt mocked him, pointing out she doesn't want them out of her sight and won't allow it. Both boys agreed to join Matt. Rand wanted to look at the palaces, which looked like a gleeman's tale. As they walked through the streets, Matt capered around, shouting about being free and laughing. Rand told them they only had an hour or so before dark to explore, so they set off. They explored buildings, the bigger the better, clambering over rubble and peering into doorways. One huge building was an empty circle with seating all around, and they wondered what it was for. Soon exhaustion set in, and Matt and Perrin wanted to head back, but Matt said that they can sleep later. They could find treasure, and they should climb at least one tower before leaving. Matt led them to a tower he spotted, but just as he's about to enter, a voice came from behind. "The towers are not safe." They whirled around to see a man in the shadows of the columns, shielding his eyes, saying he's not used to the light. Rand found his accent strange and asked who he was. They thought that the city was abandoned. "I am Mordeth," he replied, pausing as if expecting recognition, then asked them the same questions. Rand told him that they're on their way to Caemlyn and stopped here to shelter for the night. Mordeth said the word Caemlyn as if he'd never heard of it before, then told the boys he was a treasure hunter. Excitedly, Matt asked if he'd found any, and Mordeth told him, "I have, more than I can carry. I never expected to find 3 strong, healthy young men. who could help me take it to where I have my horses. In return, you can have a share of what's left. Whatever I leave will be carried off by other treasure hunters before I can return." Matt exclaimed that he knew there was treasure here, and immediately offered their help. He followed Mordef into the building, while Rand and Perrin stared at each other, then, knowing that they couldn't leave Matt alone, followed him in. Inside the building was almost pitch black, and they fumbled their way down a winding, narrow staircase. Even Matt started feeling uneasy, commenting to Mordef at how dark it was. He led them to a corridor lit by torches, and Rand could see the man properly for the first time. There was something odd about Mordef that niggled at him, but Rand could not pinpoint what it was. He was a plump man with droopy eyelids, short and completely bald. His clothing was also unusual, totally unsuited to treasure hunting and exploring. They entered a tiled room and gasped at the sight of mounds of gold, gems, goblets, weapons and jewellery. Matt ran forward with a cry that they needed sacks, starting to paw his way through a mound. Perrin was fiddling with a jewelled double axe when Rand pointed out that they can't carry all of this, not with it almost dark. Perrin agreed and said they should return tomorrow. Moraine and Lan would understand when they see. Mordef asked, "You are not alone? Who else is with you?" Matt told him, casually saying that they headed to Tar Valon. Mordef's face twisted in rage as he snarled, "Tar Valon? You said you were going to Camelin. You lied to me." Putting down the axe, Perrin asked if he still wants them to return in the morning. Panting, Mordef couldn't seem to decide, before he told them to take what they wanted. Suddenly, Rand realised what had been nagging at him, and he announced, "You don't have a shadow." Matt dropped a goblet in shock as Mordef nodded, opening his eyes fully and said, "So, it is decided." His body swelled in size, head reaching the ceiling and cutting off escape. Teeth bared in a snarl, he grabbed at them with giant hands, and with a yell, Rand fell backwards. He tried to reach his sword, but it was caught up in his cloak, as his friends also tried to evade Mordef. An agonized scream filled the room, and Rand, sword now ready, checked it hadn't come from the other boys. Matt was hiding behind a treasure pile, a dagger in his hand, and Perrin had his axe ready. Mordef was back to his normal size, crouched in a corner and clutching his knees. Matt panted that he'd tricked them, as Mordef threw back his head and wailed, "You are all dead! All dead!" He leapt across the room and transformed into a tendril of smoke, disappearing into the wall. Perrin declared it was time to go, but Matt couldn't bring himself to leave the treasure. The boys had to physically drag him out of the room. The torches started to go out as they fled down the corridor, and even Matt moved quickly now. They ran up the stairs as fast as they dared in the dark, then burst out into the last of the daylight. They headed straight to their camp, and all the while Rand felt the sensation of being watched from the shadows. They stayed in the middle of the streets, out of the shadows, until they reached safety. Rand could have sworn he heard dry laughter and felt the anticipation of the watchers. They hurried into the room, noting that Lan was absent, and were met with a livid wisdom. "You wool-headed witlings! Why under the light did you run off? Are you all right? Have you no sense at all? Lan is out looking for you right now. You'll be lucky he doesn't pound some sense into you when he gets back." Moraine was calmer, but she'd been white-knuckled until seeing them safe, and said, "You should not have done that. Something happened, judging by the way you fell over each other to enter. Tell me." Matt whined. "You said it was safe! You said Arador was an ally of Manetheren, and Trollocs wouldn't come into the city, and—" He was cut off by her asking if they saw Trollocs within the walls. Rand told her no, and the three boys began telling the story, each disjointed from the other. When Moraine heard the name Mordef, she hissed, then asked if they were sure about the name. "Be very sure." They all said yes, and she asked if he touched them, or they accepted any gifts from him. They told her no, he only tried to kill them, and Perrin explained the attack. Matt whined, "Safe, you said? All that talk of Trollocs not entering, what were we supposed to think?" Coolly, Moraine told them they didn't think at all, to not be wary of a place Trollocs feared. With certainty, Nynaeve said, "Matt's doing. He's always talking up some mischief, and the others lose the wits they were born with when they're around him." Moraine nodded, then told them, "Late during the Trolloc Wars, an army of Shadowspawn camped in these ruins. When they didn't leave, scouts were sent in, only finding weapons, bits of armour, and blood splattered everywhere. Scrawled on the walls was Trolloc script in blood, begging the Dark One to aid them. That is what keeps them outside of this place. Rand is in disbelief that this was the place they chose to shelter. They'd be safer out of the walls. Moraine explains that if they hadn't run off, they'd know she'd set wards protecting them from Shadar Logoth's evil until morning, as it cannot bear sunlight. Egwene said she thought it was called Aradol. Moraine told her it was once called Aradol, and part of the 10 nations that made up the Second Covenant that stood against the Dark Ones since the break-in. In the days when Manetheren was ruled by King Thorin al-Toran Alban, the king of Aradol was Balwin Mael, Balwin Ironhand. In the latter years of the war, a man came to Balwin's court named Mordeth. The boys all exclaimed that it couldn't be the same man, but she quieted them and continued. Soon Mordeth was second only to the king as his advisor. He whispered poison in Balwin's ear, and Aradol began to change, harden. Its new battle cry became, "The victory of the light is all," and they used the Shadow's tactics to defeat the Shadow. Many began to say they'd rather meet a Trolloc than a man of Aradol. Thorin's son Kar came to win Aradol back to the Second Covenant, only to be accused by Mordeth of being a dark friend, and his retinue was killed in front of him. He escaped the dungeons by losing his hand, fleeing assassins and never to return home. Thorin brought an army to avenge Kar, only to find the city abandoned. It had fallen to an enemy of its own making, suspicion and hate giving birth to a new evil, Mashadar. It waits hungering, and men gave the city a new name, Shadar Logoth, Shadows Waiting. Only Mordeth wasn't consumed by Mashadar, but he was ensnared by it, trapped within these walls, trying to influence people into carrying a gift outside the city, so he can consume their soul, usurp their body and spread Mashadar across the world. Perrin mumbled about him wanting them to carry treasure to his horses. He would probably plan to claim they were outside the walls. Mat asked if they were safe, and Moraine assured them that within the wards they were safe. Nynaeve worried that Lan had been gone a long time. It was now full dark. Moraine claimed, "Lan will be fine. He pledged to fight the Dark One before leaving his cradle, a sword placed in his infant hands. Besides, I would know the instant of his death, just as he would know of mine. Rest, Nynaeve, all will be well." Despite his fatigue, Rand took a while to sleep. He woke in the middle of the night, seeing that Lan was still gone, and everyone else was asleep. He wasn't sure what had woken him, and felt as if the ward was no protection. Lan appeared silently, and Moraine came awake instantly. The warder dropped Trolloc badges in her hand, telling her there were Trollocs in the city, and will be here within the hour. When she asked how many, he said there's over 100. They're frightened, killing anything that moves, even each other. It's taking 4 half-men to handle just one fist, and they're nervous too, so the search is slipshod. If they weren't heading right in this direction, he'd advise ignoring them. Moraine could tell that something was bothering him, and he replied, "The Myrddraal forced the Trollocs into the city, but what forced the Myrddraal?" The others had already woken, and Egwene asked if it was the Dark One. Nynaeve snapped, "Of course not. He's bound in Shaiol Ghul," but Moraine added, "for the time being." The Aes Sedai declared that they must leave. She can't hold them off without using so much one power it would destroy her wards, attract Mashadar, and signal every half-man in 20 miles. They will switch to her original plan, reach the river and under a shield ward, build a raft or hail a trading vessel. She wasn't strong enough before, but now she's rested. Lan explained that Trollocs and Fades loathe deep water and can't swim. Rand asked if they'd be safe once over the river, and Lan nodded, saying it'll be as hard to get them on the rafts as it is to get them in the city. Moraine ordered them to their horses. They still needed to reach the river.
Thanks for listening. Please like, share and subscribe and help get a new channel off the ground. Thank you.